Thank you, Jim. You'll recall that we've completed the initial consideration of all of our delegate selection plans at our February meeting. The party affairs team has worked closely with the small number of state parties whose plans remain in conditional compliance, and 54 plans have been found in full compliance. The plans for the Alabama Democratic Party and the Minnesota DFL remain in conditional compliance. The committee has provided direction to the parties, and no further discussion is warranted at this time. The Office of Party Affairs will continue to work with these two remaining parties to bring them into full compliance, which brings us to our last plan for review submitted by Greetings all. Thank you for gathering tonight for the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting. My name is Mignon Moore from the District of Columbia, and alongside Jim Roosevelt from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I chair the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. As we begin, please unmute and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Well, thank you. And it is a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. When your name is mentioned by Helen, kindly unmute and signify your attendance.
We'll see what happens Thursday. Kirsten, thank you.
I'm turning it over to our parliamentarian, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Applebaum.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Blanco.
Presente.
Thank you. Ms. Brazil has given her proxy to Ms. Lewis. Mr. Brennan.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Cardona.
Presente.
Thank you. Mr. Curry.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Daughtry has given her proxy to Mr. Leon. Ms. Desai Martin has given her proxy to Mr. Ray. Ms. Dowdell.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Elete has given his proxy to Ms. Blanco. Ms. Fowler.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Aridia. I don't see him or hear him. Mr. Jones.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Kmark has given her proxy to Ms. Martinez. Mr. Leon.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. McGarrick.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Martin has given his proxy to Ms. Schwecker. Ms. Martinez.
Presente.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. McGlinchey.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Ronan. She's
Hello?
driving a car. I can see you. Mr. Saunders.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Spate.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Schwecker.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson. Ms. Weingarten.
Some sort.
Ms. Williams. Mr. Chairman, there is a quorum here. You have more than 12 or more than 14 in person or by proxy.
Thank you, Helen. And as we know by our charter and bylaws, the quorum is 40% or 14 RBC members in person or by proxy. Before we move into the business of the meeting, I'll remind members to please remain muted unless you are called on to speak. Please use the raise hand feature or send a message to Veronica through the chat function if you would like to speak. When you raise your hand or send your message to Veronica, she will create a queue for the co-chairs. When it is your turn to speak, the co-chairs will recognize you and you may unmute yourself. The raised hand function is accessed, as I'm sure you've discovered before, under the reactions down at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions or comments before we get started, please submit them in the chat to Veronica or raise your hand via Zoom, and staff will help us make sure you are recognized. Veronica, do you have any questions submitted?
Seeing no hands, Chair.
Okay. All right. So seeing no further questions, or no questions at all, I will turn it over to Mignon.
Thank you, Jim. You'll recall that we completed the initial consideration of all delegate selection plans at our February meeting. The party affairs team has worked closely with the small number of state parties whose plans remain in conditional compliance, and 54 plans have been found in full compliance. The plans for the Alabama Democratic Party and the Minnesota DFL remain in conditional compliance. The committee has already provided direction to the parties and no further discussion is warranted. The Office of Party Affairs will continue to work with these two remaining parties to bring them to full compliance. Which brings us to our last plan for review, submitted on April 11th by the New Hampshire Democratic Party. Jim?
Thank you, Mignon. As you'll recall, this Rules and Bylaws Committee requested that the New Hampshire Democratic Party send a compliant delegate selection plan to us by April 11, 2024, so that we might review and approve it at today's meeting. Following the March Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting, Mignon and I met with Chair Ray Buckley and his staff and brought forth the ideas we heard from this committee. The New Hampshire Democratic Party returned a plan on April 11 that utilized a previously scheduled meeting on April 27, this past Saturday, at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics to enact a party-run process. That plan includes the following key elements. On April 27, New Hampshire used a proportional representation system based on the result of a party-run process for apportioning delegates to the National Convention. Secondly, presidential preference was determined at registration. Participants were required to sign a statement of support for an eligible presidential candidate, along with an affirmation of participation in the process as a Democrat. Participants were provided a pre-printed ballot containing the names of the qualified presidential candidates and the delegate candidates pledged to those presidential candidates. Third, eligible presidential candidates must have been a nationally recognized candidate for the Democratic nomination for president as determined by the chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party and must not be subject to Rule 21CB to participate in the party run process on April 27. As you'll recall, Rule 21CB states that a presidential candidate who campaigns in a state where the state party is in violation of the timing provisions of these rules, or where a party or caucus is set by a state government on a date that violates the timing provision of these rules, shall not receive pledged delegates or delegate votes from that state. And finally, based on the expression of presidential preference on April 27, New Hampshire's district level delegates selected the pledged Clio delegates and at-large delegates and alternates. As such, because the New Hampshire Democratic Party has since addressed the essential concerns expressed in the staff evaluation, we recommend that this committee find the 2024 New Hampshire Democratic Party's delegate selection plan in full compliance. It's a pleasure to be able to say those words. We, as a committee and as a national committee, have gone through a difficult number of weeks and months getting to this point, and I know that New Hampshire has gone through a difficult number of weeks and months where some things we'd like to have seen take place did not. As it happens, all that is behind us now. We have worked out compliance with our rules and with the charter. So I'd like to ask for a motion to find the plan in full compliance so we can begin our discussion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
I see Frank Leone's hand up.
Thank you. The floor is now open for discussion by members. Please raise your hand to be recognized if you would like to speak.
Chair, I see Frank Leone's hand.
Mr. Leone, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to support the motion to find the plan in full compliance. This committee made it clear that New Hampshire needs to have a delegate selection process that provides for the expression of presidential preference during the allowed window of March 5th to June 22nd. Their plan does that. Their process this weekend complies with it. And so I think we should have it be in full compliance.
Any further comments or questions?
Chair, I see Carol Fowler.
Carol?
I think that was a motion from Frank, and I would second the motion.
Actually, it was seconded by Frank, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
That's fine. I'm curious though, and because you said several times that there was a party-run process. What was the process?
Would you like to walk through that, Veronica?
Yes. So the New Hampshire Democratic Party scheduled on April 27th, as that was a previously scheduled, I believe, Central Committee meeting and previously scheduled meeting as part of their original delegate selection plan, a party-run process by which participants who joined for the event filled out their ballot upon entry. They registered their presidential preference upon entry. They then selected the district delegates allotted to eligible candidates on that same ballot. The district delegates were selected through that process, and then those district level delegates selected the at-large and Clio delegates following that. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Any other comments or questions?
Seeing none.
Any other comments?
Seeing none. Oh, Artie Blanco has her hand up, Chair.
Ms. Blanco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question. Was this the state convention for the New Hampshire Democratic Party? Or is there another state convention happening?
No, yes, their state convention is May 11th. And that's been reflected in their plan now as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Chair Joanne Dowdell.
Ms. Dowdell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Madam Chair, please forgive my voice. I don't know where I've left it, but I've lost it. I would like to thank this committee. And most of all, I would like to thank the staff for their diligence and patience in working with the New Hampshire Democratic Party. And I certainly would like to extend my thanks to the New Hampshire Democratic Party for working with the DNC and this committee to bring their plan into full compliance. I know that we have had some challenging moments, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, but we are now focused squarely on the November election and re-electing President Biden and Vice President Harris. And again, thank you to the staff and to this committee for their work on this.
Thank you, Joanne. You and Chair Buckley also deserve our thanks for working with us to achieve this compliance with the rules today. So thank you so much. Any other comments or questions?
Molly McGarrick with her hand raised.
Ms. McGarrick?
I just wanted to acknowledge both of our co-chairs for their leadership and perseverance throughout this entire process, and also just thank Joanne. She has come to every single meeting and just kept all of us focused on what was most important, and it was the full inclusion of everyone who wants to participate in the convention and support our president in his reelection. So I don't want to be premature and say congratulations, but want to acknowledge just the tremendous hard work and effort, focus and tact that it took everyone to get to this point, including the wonderful team at the DNC staff.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you for focusing us back on the point here, which is reelecting President Biden. Any other comments or questions?
Seeing no hands.
Okay, so seeing no further requests for discussion, the chair will ask for a vote on the motion to find the plan in full compliance. Will all those in favor of the motion please unmute yourself and say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please unmute yourself and say nay. I do not hear any nay votes, and so the motion carries. Thank you and congratulations, everybody. With that, we are pleased to move forward in partnership with our colleagues from the great state of New Hampshire, reaching a successful resolution that ensures that New Hampshire's delegates are represented at the Democratic National Convention this summer. I'm going to turn it back to you now, Mignon.
Thank you, Jim, and congratulations to New Hampshire and to the RBC for really putting their heads to the grind to make sure we got to a great resolution. We look forward to working together to continue a smooth nominating process ahead of the convention. To that end, we have 7 technical amendments to advise you of. Under Regulation 2.9, the co-chairs of the RBC are empowered to approve technical amendments and then advise the committee of the amendments so you may consider them. Technical amendments are changes that do not substantively change the delegate selection process and do not impede participation in the process. You can review the list of technical amendments on the screen. Are we going to? Yes, there we go. Do any members have any questions or wish to have the full committee consider any amendment? Please raise your hand now if so.
Seeing none, Madam Chair.
If with no further motions, then I will turn it back to Jim.
Where there are no motions, we do not need to vote, obviously. Technical amendments, unless they are brought forward to be considered in a motion, are adopted. So we have actually concluded our agenda for today. Regarding future proceedings, as outlined in the call, any unresolved challenges related to delegate selection and the delegate selection process that still are in existence on June 24th will transition from the oversight of the Rules and Bylaws Committee to the Credentials Committee. That's June 24th. While challenges will go to the Credentials Committee, the Rules and Bylaws Committee will maintain jurisdiction over revisions in state delegate selection plans and ensuring compliance with equal division requirements. That's all to say, we're reaching the end of our calendar, but we're not quite there yet and may have one more meeting or business over email. Does anyone have any questions or announcements before we wrap up?
Seeing none.
So with no additional questions, I want to extend my gratitude once again to our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, and to our great staff from Party Affairs, Veronica Martinez-Roman, Aaron Buckley, Rick Boylan, and Alicia Magani. Lastly, Mignon and I would like to express our appreciation to the DNC leadership, Sam Cornell, Mary Beth Cahill, and Nick Bauer, along with the Secretary's Office, our DNC counsel, Andy Levine, our court reporter, our ASL interpreter, and the team at Weymouth Watson for their efforts in facilitating this virtual gathering. If there are no objections, the meeting is now adjourned. Hearing none, we're done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.